All right, seniors, World War II, 1942, 1943, go. So as I talked about in class yesterday, we had on December 8th, 1941, the U.S. entering the war right after Pearl Harbor. The U.S. and Britain were very much opposed to Soviet communism. We talked about that in class yesterday. And so there's going to be tension within the alliance really throughout the entirety of the war. The only question is whether or not the focal point will be on defeating Germany or having the alliance remain together. Oh, let's say no to that. So the Allies knew they needed each other to win, which meant that they were cohesive in the sense that they were working together. They agree on what you would call a beat Hitler first strategy, which means that all three of the Allies, Russia, Britain, and the United States, are going to fight Germany primarily. The US does do some fighting against Japan concurrently, and I'll talk about that, but really the primary focus is going to be on fighting and defeating Hitler. So the main idea of the battles in the European theater in 1942 and 1943 go like this. Stalin wants the US and Britain to attack Germany directly, what he would call the Western Front. And the Western Front would be attacking from Britain and from the United States, and attacking first probably in France, right here, and then also attacking from Britain into France because Germany had controlled France by that time. So the Soviet Union had been fighting against Germany since 1940, and the Soviet Union is advancing at that point in time to try to take over territory in Germany. So the Soviet Union is fighting on the Eastern Front. The idea that Stalin wants is to have France be attacked by Britain and the United States. The US and Britain don't do this. Instead, they agree to fight in North Africa, which makes the Soviet Union really mad, but it probably does minimize casualties for the United States and Britain. So as opposed to fighting here in France, Britain and the United States go around here and they fight Germany in North Africa. And they fight a series of battles in 1942 and 1943, and they kind of go up and down the coast of North Africa. The upside is that the strategy is successful for the Western Allies. The downside is for the Soviet Union, they face massive casualties because Germany is focusing most of its battle plans on defeating the Soviet Union here. So 1942 in Japan is one where the United States is fighting alone, and you have an initial set of troops that are in the Philippines. And the US troops in the Philippines face heavy attack and are really forced out of the Philippines by the summer of 1942. So General MacArthur, who was at the U.S. general in command of the U.S. forces in the Philippines, vows that he shall return, which is this ominous statement because he does in fact return to Japan and takes over Japan and runs it as a governor from 1945 to 1946. But the U.S. forces in 1942 are forced to retreat from the Philippines, and Japan conducts a series of what will be called war crimes in the U.S. and Filipino evacuation of Japan. They force 14,000 war prisoners to march about 60 miles on the main island of the Philippines, and about 14,000 people die, most of them Filipino soldiers, during this, what was called the Bataan Death March. And this is, in 1945, the United States determines that this is a war crime, but it does highlight the level of brutality that goes on in the Pacific theater. This picture here is a propaganda poster created by the US military during the war, and it references the Bataan Death March. And if you look at the text of it, right, you have this caricature of a Japanese soldier that really is pretty racist in the way that it's drawn. You have a news story from the Bataan Death March, and then the text at the bottom, which is not anything that we would consider acceptable to stay right now, but the motivation is for workers in America to keep working to prevent Japan from doing this. And this is just one example of propaganda during World War II that we'll look at more in class. So to sum up, you have fighting in 42 and 43. The US and Britain are fighting in North Africa and the Philippines, North Africa against Germany, and then in the Pacific, the US is fighting against Japan, but really the bulk of the fighting going on is the US retreating. You do have, and I have one more slide for this, a turning point battle here at Midway. Midway is an island that is northwest of Pearl Harbor and northwest of Hawaii, and this becomes kind of the turning point of a battle, that the US is able to decode Japanese intelligence to find out that there was an incoming attack on the island of Midway, and the US catches Japan by surprise, defeats them, and this leads to a series of victories in late 42 and early 43 where the US begins to attack Japanese outposts on the outlying islands. You have fighting that will go on here in Guadalcanal and several other islands. That's it for today. Have a good day. See you soon.